Welcome everyone, greetings, and welcome to the Association of Academic Health Centers International's Eastern Africa Regional Roundtable. This roundtable is in conjunction with AAHCI's 2021 annual meeting themed Leveraging Lessons of the Pandemic to Accelerate Evolution of the Academic Health Center. It is one of many platforms for leaders in the region to connect and share their programs, initiatives, and experiences. Don't forget to register for our sessions next week. We will include a link in the chat box if you have not already done so. And without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Professor William Macharia, Associate Dean of Research at the Faculty of Health Sciences at Aga Khan University's Medical College in East Africa, and also AAHCI's Eastern Africa Regional Ambassador. Professor Macharia, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Habiba, for that introduction. That mine is very brief to welcome everyone to this session. I'm speaking on behalf of the East African Advisory Committee members of AAHCI, because this is what I'm doing on their behalf. This is a roundtable that we've been waiting for, and we highly appreciate the support that we've had in getting this to happen from you, Habiba, Christine, and the other team from AAHCI headquarters. We are also highly appreciative of our guest speaker who is going to be introduced shortly, Dr. Yodi Mahedra, so that you can give some flavor to the exchange in experiences that are going to be made by members from within this region. I would also like to give apologies of my dean, Dr. Lukoe Atwoli, who is also a member of Association of Academic Health Centers International Steering Committee. He's held up in another meeting, but he'll be joining us as soon as the other meeting is over. He's also where I was a little bit held up, but glad I'm here. So I think with those few remarks, and welcome note, I will invite Dr. Harun Kimani, who is a member of the Advisory Committee for the East African AAHCI board, to introduce our guest speaker and take over the meeting from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Macharia, for the introduction. I am Dr. Harun Kimani, acting Dean Kenyatta University for the purpose of this meeting. I am about to introduce our guest speaker, who is, we are very grateful to have in this round table. And he is Dr. Yodi Mahedra Tata, who is currently the Vice Dean for Research and Development in the Faculty of Medicine, Public Health and Nursing, Universitas Gadjah Mada in Indonesia. So Dr. Yodi, as he has agreed that we can call him so, is a medical doctor in training, and he has done a lot of postgraduate training in international health, public health, and tropical medicine. And currently he's leading the Southeast Asian Regional Training Center for Health Research, which is supported by WHO TDR. He's done a lot of research, and his interest is in global health, implementation science, and disease control, health policy. And he has co-authored numerous peer-reviewed articles and monographs in different books. So Dr. Yodi will be discussing the topic of today, and I'm sure he has got, he'll be sharing with us certain slides, and the topic is of high interest to us in East Africa. So mine is just to welcome him and let him feel most welcome as we listen to him. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kimani. Can you hear me fine?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, we are hearing you fine. Thank you, welcome.
Let me just share my screen. Wait. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you very much for the invitations to join this forum to learn from each other. So it's really a pleasure to be able to join the East African Regional Forum. Unfortunately, I've never been to Kenya, so this is virtual, my first virtual visit to Kenya. I've been to Uganda, but I haven't been to Kenya, so I hope to come to Kenya one day as soon as we get this pandemic over with. Yeah. So here I'm going to share with you about our role as the academic health system in Indonesia in terms of advancing COVID-19 vaccinations in our country. But just to start with, I think it's useful to appreciate that every country have its own sets of challenges, which might be different from one to another. So here just to highlight, one of our biggest challenges in Indonesia is that we are not a landmass country, we are an archipelago. So we are considered of 17,000 islands. So that is a major challenge by itself if you think about a mass vaccination program for COVID, because we have to distribute our vaccine across these islands. So that's a peculiar challenge which I would like to highlight in terms of a geographical feature of Indonesia. And also just to have some comparison between Indonesia and Kenya to put things into perspective. Here you see that both of us have different challenges, but just to highlight also, I think one of the contrast here, which is quite challenging for us, is the size of our population. So our population is 273 million. That's very large. So if we think about, for example, aiming for getting herd immunity, meaning trying to reach vaccination coverage about 70%, we're talking about a population of more than 200 million. So that's quite a big challenge by itself. Yeah? Now, moving more toward into the COVID-19 situation, again, just to be able to contrast with what's happening in Kenya in terms of the number of cases. So it's been much worse in Indonesia until quite recently. So we had our last surge June and July. So that was the big peak. But in the past few weeks or so, it has been going down and things are much more under control, but still slightly higher in terms of cases compared to what's happening in Kenya at the moment. And also in terms of death, it was also quite severe in June and July. So almost every day, someone we know, someone we work with passed away. So that was quite grim. But in the past few weeks or so, that has become much less and less. But still also our death rate is still higher than, for example, in Kenya as well. Now, in terms of vaccination, this is what's happening in the past few months. So this is also being accelerated because of the surge, of the recent surge. So as you can see here, it was quite rapid in terms of the escalation. So we are now reaching about 30% of our population, which is being vaccinated for COVID-19. But if we compare it to our regional average, this is actually still quite low. So if you look at what's happening in our neighboring countries, Singapore, they have vaccinated over 80% of their population, Malaysia over 65%, Thailand over 40%. So we're in the low end of 30%. But also bearing in mind that our population is much bigger than Singapore, Malaysia, or Thailand. So it's a bit more challenging for us to be able to reach the level of coverage that they're having. And of course, there are a lot of challenges at different level, at the global, at national, at local level, at the system level, which would explain this coverage issue. But I'm not going to go into that in the presentation. We can discuss it later, but I'm just going to focus more of what we try to do as an academic health system to be able to contribute to accelerate the vaccination. Yeah. So here at Gajah Mada University, we started to be active in the vaccination program since July. So 8th of July, that's our first vaccination program. And it's still ongoing until this week. And we are still having scheduled until the coming weeks as well. So from 8th of July to 20th September, we've been targeting about 67,000 people within our province, Yogyakarta province. And we've managed to vaccinate 56,000 people through our campus. And this is the main mode that we're using. This is the drive-through vaccination site within our campus. So people basically can go through, be it by car, be it by motorcycle, by bicycle, or some people walk through, just walking through that. And this is the modality, the mode that we see is the most manageable in terms of being able to catch such a large number of population, but also still safe in terms of the distance, in terms of limiting the duration of interactions and so forth. So with this drive-through mode, we've managed to at least vaccinate over 50,000 people within the last 3 months. And this is for the general populations, but we also try to help the government in terms of getting into more of the special population, which is a bit hard to get. So for example, we also do special program for the elderly. That was starting around late July. And then just recently also we moved into people with disability, which is also not easy to reach. And most recently, we also move into the pregnant women. So we've also been doing a vaccination for pregnant women since a few weeks ago. So that's also, these are the kind of things which we initiated and we lead in Indonesia as the first time, and also demonstrate how it can be done for the government. So after this, then other centers, other hospitals, other healthcare then also start to vaccinate the special populations as well. Now, of course, we cannot do this ourselves as an academic health system. So we do have a lot of partners, a lot of people that we collaborate with. So here, for example, is our Minister of Health. We collaborate, we coordinate very closely with our Minister of Health. So he often visits our campus to give his support and to make sure that we get the vaccines that we need. That's from the top level, and here more from the grassroots level, we collaborate with the women organizations on the ground, and so that's giving us the capability to reach people, communities at a large number. This is the army, the military. They also help us in terms of securing vaccines from the military channels. And this is the police. Also, police have their own channels in terms of securing vaccines and many more. We also collaborate with business corporations, philanthropies, and so forth. So all of this have provided us the resource that we need in terms of scaling up vaccinations in Indonesia. But it's not just about the vaccination program. So if you look at into COVID-19 vaccinations as a whole, there are short-term, medium-term, and long-term programs that we are embarking on at the moment. So the vaccination program is something which is more immediate, short-term. But we also contribute in terms of knowledge disseminations because, as we know, I think in every parts of the world, there's a lot of disinformation, a lot of misinformation about vaccine, which is contributing to vaccine hesitancy. So we are also doing a lot of knowledge dissemination, conducting webinars, doing education sessions, also working in the social media to disseminate knowledge regarding vaccines, to be able to counter the vaccine hesitancy movement. And then that's for the short term. For the medium term, we're also doing multi-center clinical trials with pharmaceutical companies from abroad who have candidate vaccines which are more or less ready to enter clinical trial stage. And so we hope that would add the options in terms of the portfolio of vaccines that we can use in the short and the medium term, because we don't have enough vaccine at the moment to cover the whole population. So we need to add more options into the portfolio. So that's why we're collaborating also with some pharmaceutical company to conduct clinical trials so that we have more vaccine, more options to count on in the medium term. And also we're helping the government in terms of doing the monitoring evaluation of the vaccination program, because there's a lot of things that we don't know about. For example, the duration of protections. We don't really know for each vaccine. Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? So that's the kind of thing that we are monitoring together with the government, and whether we need a booster or not. So that's another study that we're doing on. So those are the kind of initiative that we're working in the medium term from the government, hoping that that would give some information which would be useful to feed it into policy making. Now, in the long term, meaning not for this particular pandemic, but because we know this is the age of the pandemics and this is not going to be the last pandemic, so we need to be better prepared. So what we're doing now, we are boosting our R&D infrastructure. So for example, now we're building our BSL-3 level lab, biosafety level 3, which will enable us to work with highly infectious pathogens like SARS-CoV-2. We don't have that at the moment. So that's why why it limits our capacity to do research and development with SARS-CoV-2. But now we're building it, and hopefully by next year it'll be up and running. So for the future, hopefully we'll be more ready to be able to research and development working with highly infectious pathogens. We're also working with the government to bid for the regional mRNA transfer hub, so that hopefully when the next pandemic comes, we'll be more ready to transfer technologies from companies which are producing mRNA-based vaccines. And we're also doing our own vaccine development at the moment. So we are also producing our vaccines, not for the sake of this particular time, but actually at least to have this capacity and experience to be able to develop vaccines for the longer term, so that if the next pandemic comes, we have our own capacity and we don't rely too much or depend too much on other foreign companies to be able to get vaccines in the country. So those are the initiatives that we have within our academic health system, the short term, medium, and long term, the longest term being also to be able to develop our own vaccines. But from the lessons so far, what we see is that it's not enough just to invest on capacity to be able to develop a vaccine in terms of technical vaccine. When we say a technical vaccine, it usually consists of antigens, adjuvant, preservatives, stabilizers, buffers, antibiotic, and so forth. But we think that for the next pandemic, technical vaccine itself won't be enough. We would also need a social vaccine. So when we talk about social vaccine, meaning that to be able to be better prepared for the next pandemic, we need to build in resilience in our health system. And we also need to build capacity to develop innovations, because many of the existing strategies, tools are not working, are not sufficient. So we always need to be able to innovate, to develop new tools and technology. And it's also about open science. That's something also very new for us now, but I think it is something we would need more in the future, so that it will be easier. So not everybody to develop something by themselves from zero. And also this pandemic gave us the lessons, the importance of partnerships, because we would not be able to do it ourselves. So that will be more important in next pandemic. And also a lot of capacity for communication, because there is so much misinformation, so much disinformation, and it's just going to get worse in the next pandemic. So we really need to build up our capacity, to communicate to the general public, but be able to communicate science more credibly. And last but not least, it's also about solidarity. We see now a lot of problems of this vaccine equity because of vaccine nationalism. Many of the vaccines are being hoarded in high-income countries. So this is something that we need to advocate together to have more solidarity at the global level. I think that's it. Hopefully that's useful. Looking forward to any discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yodi. I think we've been within our time where we are now supposed to start question and answer the sessions. And I think we have got quite a number of members from the East African region. And I'm sure they are preparing their questions and also preparing also to give an overview of what is happening in their area. But to start ourselves off, I would want to really know, as the others are preparing their questions, does your population have certain preference of vaccines? Are you having people who have got certain preferences, who don't want to get a certain type of vaccine? And are there people who are refusing to get vaccinated?
Yes.
Also with that, we would want you to explain to us how this drive-through mode of vaccination, the one you are helping the government, how is it working? Is it the people you are calling, or is it the health workers who are going to the population? Just make that clear a bit.
Okay, so yes, the first question was very interesting, a preference for vaccines. Yeah, so most of Indonesians are vaccinated by the Chinese vaccine, so it's Sinovac. That's the one we get the earliest. So we were one of the earliest country to start our vaccination program. We started already in January. So most countries hasn't started in January, but we start in January because we already had agreement with China. And that enabled us to get a huge bulk of vaccines from China, Sinovac. So that was the earliest one that we can get our hands on, because it's very difficult to get Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca at that early stage. So our government had a special agreement with China, and they managed to get Sinovac in the country very early on. So I got my own vaccination in January for the first dose and February on the second dose using Sinovac. Yeah. Having said that, yes, I mean, there are certain groups in the populations who are not so keen with the vaccine from China for particular reasons. There are also, for example, especially for religious reason, they're thinking that it might not be halal, especially for the Muslims. So that's something also that we need to work out. And so many of them would actually prefer to wait for the other vaccines, for example, for Moderna, Pfizer, or AstraZeneca, which took quite a while to get into the country. So in our own position is, of course, I mean, all of these vaccines have their strengths and weaknesses, but what we try to promote is that the best vaccine is the vaccine you can get as early as possible, because you want to get protected as early as possible. Of course, the efficacy varies, but you don't know when you're going to get the vaccine because such limited. And so that what we try to promote is that whatever you get the vaccine, you get it, or whatever it is, be it Sinovac, be it AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Moderna, and so on. So that's the situation. So indeed, there are preferences. Indeed, there are some hesitancy, but that's why we had this knowledge dissemination program also from our academic health system to be able to counter that. Okay. So that's in terms of the vaccine hesitancy. And then for the drive-through, so for each of those drive-through, there are partners that we work with, so that we actually wait in our campus, but then our partners are the one who's trying to bring them in. So for example, when we work with the women organization, so they are the one who's reaching out in the community, informing to the community that Gajah Mada University is having a vaccination program on certain dates. So they bring in the people there. Also, for example, we work the military, then it's the military who's trying to reach out and also promote and bring the people to our campus. So we set up the facility, and our partners usually provide, for example, the vaccine, but they also help in terms of getting the people to campus, disseminating the information, promoting the outreach, and so forth. So that's what the partnership is all about. Our role is more of providing the venue and the human resources to be able to deliver the vaccine. So that's it, Dr. Kimani. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. I think we are learning a lot on how you have managed to go quite a higher percentage coverage, because as you can see, somewhere in Kenya, we are still very low. So I would invite the others, we may be starting with Professor Macharia. I have seen there are some questions he would want to be clarified, so as they can also start asking their questions. Professor Macharia.
Thank you very much, Harun and Yodi, for the presentation. Very and extremely enlightening and fascinating to actually know what you've been able to accomplish. Well, it's part of the, the questions that I had put on the chat box. I think you've already addressed on the type of vaccines that you are using and the circumstances that has made it possible to have that quite admirable coverage, especially, knowing how scarce the vaccine is in the low-income countries. Now, the question that I would ask you to maybe enlighten us on is what kind of breakthrough experiences are you having, at the moment? I guess we are probably also in the third or fourth waves of COVID. I know you might not have the actual numbers, but the experience in general about the people who are coming back, having been either partially or fully immunized, your experience. And second, if maybe I can answer that, then I can ask the other one, which is brief.
Okay, thank you. So yes, indeed, we don't actually have numbers in terms of the breakthrough experience. We do get reports in terms of colleagues, for example. I mean, we have colleagues who have been vaccinated dual dose or even triple dose. I forgot to mention, we also have given boosters for healthcare professionals. So to give them extra protection during the surge. So we give them third dose. But we also have reports even from colleagues who already even get their third dose, and some of them if also still contact and get COVID positive. But in general, even though we don't have numbers, in most cases they are much less severe. So that we do have reports of people who has been immunized, who've been vaccinated, but still COVID positive. But as far as we can observe, these are mostly much less severe than others who have not been vaccinated. So what in general, our observation is the vaccines varied very much because we're using so many vaccines. But in general, most of the vaccines are good enough to protect us from the severe form of COVID-19. And it's fairly good, moderate in terms of preventing infections. I mean, it's not so high in terms of efficacy of preventing infections. So that's why we're seeing, even though they're vaccinated, they still get COVID, but at least they're getting more of the mild or the less severe forms of COVID-19.
Have you as yet started experiencing, like in a comparison to the earlier waves? Have you started seeing like the ability for healthcare systems, ability to cope? Has it been improving or than during the earlier waves?
The earlier waves, the number was low, so we did not have problem in terms of coping with the earlier wave. This last wave was really severe. It was like 10 times than the first wave. So we were really overwhelmed. At certain point, our own teaching hospital ran out of oxygen. So that was quite scary. So it was day by day, we had to search for oxygen and we had to manage that. And it's not easy. So in June and July, it was very hard for us. We were really overwhelmed. We really realized that we don't have the surge capacity to be able to cope with such a high surge. So that's one of the hard lessons that we learned, that we really need to ramp up our surge capacity for the next pandemic, because this last one we really didn't manage. Our health system was in the brink of collapse basically because of that.
Thank you very much. If you allow me the last question, Chair, it's about the complexity of your country. I had absolutely no idea. I know I visited some Bali Island some time back. Very beautiful place. I hope it's still as beautiful. But, having these 17,000 islands and all this, I know you talked about the strategy which you've been using of walk through or drive through. But logistically, can you please give us a better feel of how, your government has been able to cope with this, with such, geographical diversity?
Yeah. So geographic is quite an issue. The thing is that 70% of the population is in the main island, so that helps a bit because the rest of the islands gets about 30% of the population. So if we manage to do it in Java Island, which is the main island, we cover at least 70% of the population. Yeah. And also in terms of the vaccines, because they have different requirements. So some requires deep freezer, minus 80 degrees. Some are quite stable, so that they don't require deep freezer. So what we do is mostly for the vaccines which require deep freezer, then it's mostly in the main island Java where we have networks of deep freezer. While for the vaccines which go outside the main island, that we need more stable vaccines, which they don't require deep freezer. So it's more of that, working out the technical nitty-gritties within and link it with the existing infrastructure. And of course, there are still a lot of problems, but in general, that's what we try to do. So we start with Sinovac because also it's a bit more stable. It doesn't require deep freezers. So we managed to distribute it quite fast because we don't need that. And then Moderna and Pfizer just came in a few months ago. And so that's distributed mostly in the main islands where the freezers are there. So that helps a bit in terms of distributing the logistic. Okay, thank you.
Dr. Lubano, I believe you had a question in the chat. Did you want to?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, Dr. Lubano, go ahead.
Yeah. Right, thank you very much, the presenter and everybody. It's very exciting and very enlightening presentation. My question is regarding vaccination for pregnant and lactating mothers. Do you have guidelines, and in which trimester? And what is your experience so far? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that is something which is very new. Also, I'm not aware of international guidelines which we are actually referring to for this one. This is something which was decided locally because we are seeing a lot of COVID cases among pregnant women because they were not vaccinated. Most of the vaccinations were for the general populations. They were left out from the vaccination program for over 6 months. And so they start to get COVID. So then our colleagues, the OBGY, then they start to do their own studies, their own research, and they then start to decide and have a consensus that it seems to be safe enough for these pregnant women. I'm not aware of the detail of the guidelines because it's also something which is very new. So it's something that we are doing while we are observing at the same time. Yeah. So it's just that we have these vaccines that we observe in a small populations, and so far there is no adverse event among this small group, and then we decided to start introducing it in a larger scale. But it's also not something which is done nationally yet. So we are doing it under close monitoring to make sure that everything is going well. So it's something which is very new, and we're also string triathlon as well. It just comes more from the concern that a lot of pregnant women are really getting infected by COVID, and they were not well protected from COVID because of that. That's all.
Thank you very much. Maybe if you allow me again, Chair, just in another similar population that is of concern in schools and colleges. It's a big challenges. I don't know how you're handling that because those are some of the issues we are grappling with as well. Thank you.
Okay, so for colleges, so we've already vaccinated our college students as well. We started with the medical students because we also need them to be able to interact with patients. So our medical students, the medical interns, they were vaccinated already. So it started with medicine, but it also started with the other faculties as well. They are also being vaccinated because now the vaccine are recommended already for adolescents. So for the adolescents group, we started vaccinating my own children. So my daughter, she is now 12 and 15. Both of them are vaccinated, and they were provided vaccination through their schools as well. So the schools also organize vaccination program because that's one of the requirements if any of the schools would like to reopen for students to come back and have to face-to-face interactions. So that's happening. The challenge, of course, in every school, there's always certain numbers of the students or families who are hesitant of getting vaccinated, and that becomes still something which you need to work out. But the vaccination program is out there, and they're reaching out students, first the medical students, first the university students, but now it's already reaching the secondary school, not the primary school, but up to the secondary school. And my daughters have started to go to school starting this Monday because all of the children in our schools have been vaccinated. Thank you.
Professor Nakanjako, I think you have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing your experience. I had a similar question. What is the plan for the children under 12 years in the primary schools? How are you going to handle this?
So that is something that we haven't really embarked on. So we started population by population. So we started with the adolescents, with the university students, and then the secondary school, and then the people with disability, and then the pregnant mothers. Up to now, we do not have yet a vaccine which is approved for the children below adolescent age. So that's why we haven't moved to that population yet. For the adolescent, we have it approved already by our FDA, even for the pregnant mothers and also for the people with disability. But for the children, we have to wait until the FDA has approval for vaccine which are allowed for that particular group. And as long as that's not there, then we do not have any plans for any program for that yet. So there is the primary school also is not yet starting back in terms of face-to-face because of that. So only the secondary school at the moment is open again in Indonesia, gradually.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Yodi. I think we still have more questions. Personally, I have got a question on the way you talked about military and police. You say they are being useful. I don't think in Kenya or most of our East African region we have used this cadre. But I would want to know: are they having a different source of vaccine, or are they just to guide the population, or is it for security, or how is it that you are able to work with military and police for such a health matter? Thank you.
Yeah. So actually, they came to us. So it wasn't us coming to the military or the police. I mean, the military have their own health personnel. The police also have their own health personnel, and they have their own hospital. They have their own vaccines, but they also have limitation in terms of their human resources. So that's why they came to us to collaborate with us. So basically, they provide the vaccine from their own channels, and they also provide additional personnel. But then we have much more people in terms of people who can help in vaccinating. So we have our residents, our lecturers and teachers, so we can mobilize them. Yeah. So it's more of that, but it actually, the initiative came from them. So that's quite interesting. So they were the one who were knocking on our doors and asking, I mean, would be willing to collaborate with us to be able to increase the coverage? Because it was an instruction from the president, basically, that all elements have to work together to increase the coverage of vaccination. So even the military and the police, they were on board, and they actually came to us and also to other universities to collaborate in terms of these vaccination programs.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I think maybe that is also one of the things. In different meetings, people then may be able to consider. I wonder whether there's somebody else who has another question for Dr. Yodi before we start giving our scenarios in our different academic health centers.
Yes, if you allow me, Chair. Yeah, I have
Welcome.
two issues just to touch on the medium term and long term as regards the clinical trials. If you have any locally type of developed candidate vaccines that you are conducting clinical trials, or if you're also partnering with already the ones in the market, since they are all under this emergency use authorization. That is question number one. The second point is regarding the long term. Keen and even us as a country, we are keen on the related aspects, as you've rightly mentioned, in terms of investment in the infrastructure for development of vaccines, since we are in the era of pandemics now. And then in terms of the partnerships, particularly for this transfer of mRNA technology and other technologies, what are your views and what prospects are there for us to perhaps initiate a conversation on partnership in these two particular areas, your medium term and long term, because we are right on the same kind of trajectory of thought at the moment as a country. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. So in terms of the clinical trials, it's both. So at the moment, most of the clinical trials are in collaborations with international pharmaceutical companies, mostly from overseas, who have already candidate vaccine, which are already entering at least phase 1. And usually what we do here is the phase 2 or phase 3. Yeah, so those are the clinical trials which are ongoing and which we are preparing on for now. Again, it's more of to be able to get access to additional vaccines, because we cannot depend on Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca because of the numbers which are quite limited. So we want to have more options. So that's why we collaborate with many companies who have potential candidate vaccines. But we do also develop our own vaccines. It's just that none of them is at that stage yet. So the most advanced one would only go to clinical trial, I think, by the end of this year. In Indonesia, developed by another institution, our own Gajah Mada University, we will only enter our preclinical trials early next year. But again, that's more for the long term. It's more for having that capacity to be able to work on that vaccine, because what we learned from China, for example, why China managed to get so many vaccines in a short time. Well, they actually started a long time ago during the first SARS, not during this SARS. So they had a lot of vaccine candidates back then, which they had to pick, they just need to pick up and continue and follow through. We did not have that. We start from scratch. But if we do it now, and if the next pandemic comes, then we would have that same wealth of assets, of experience, which we can also build on if the next pandemic comes. So that's the thinking with our own vaccines, not for this pandemic, but at least for the next pandemic, we would have more candidates on the table if we need to work on them. And then in terms of the technology transfer hubs, so WHO is actually having that initiative for different regions. We are trying to bid to become the transfer hub for the Asian region. It's still something which is in process. I think in Africa, WHO assigned it to South Africa. I have to, correct me if I'm wrong. I think that the WHO assigned South Africa as the regional mRNA transfer hub. So perhaps, so their responsibility would be to transfer the technology across the African continent. So perhaps it's something that you can try to look up with South African colleagues. So in our own setting, we try to become the Asian mRNA transfer hub. It's not yet approved. We're still working and negotiating. But if that happens, then we should be able to adopt mRNA technology much faster. But then we will also have the responsibility to disseminate it across the region. So that's how things are at the moment.
That's good, Dr. Yodi. I'm sure there are more questions. I think we may have a few more minutes on questions. And I also want you to clarify on what you said about monitoring. Monitoring, maybe monitoring and evaluation, what you are doing with the government, what is it using, which are the indicators? Is it just a vaccine uptake? Is it antibody? Is it infection? Or what is it that you are using in your monitoring as you're helping the government do the monitoring and evaluation of the vaccination program?
Yeah, so we are helping them monitoring some aspects of the vaccination program. The biggest question they have is whether we need boosters or not. So that's the most immediate question. So what we are monitoring is the duration of the protection of the vaccine. So that's the number one that we are monitoring at the moment. How long is the protection of these vaccines, whether we actually need boosters or not. I mean, the WHO recommendation for the moment is we are not going for boosters, but we wait for the evidence. So we are trying to accumulate evidence in terms of whether we actually need boosters in the coming months. For the healthcare worker, we already decide we give boosters, but for the general population, that's a whole big debate. So we need more evidence in terms of the duration of the protections. And on top of that, we have other issues which we are monitoring. So for example, we're also monitoring in terms of the supply chain. We're helping them to be able to monitor if there's anything wrong with the supply chain, what needs to be improved. We're also improving, also helping them in terms of, for example, the medical waste management, because that's also an issue. So there are different aspects of the vaccination program we're monitoring, but at the moment, our biggest concern is the duration of protection, to be able to actually give recommendation whether a booster is actually required or not.
Oh, that's good. So Fazad Ali, I have seen your question. Can you press the question to Dr. Yodi?
Hi, good afternoon, Dr. Yodi. My question is, how you are dealing with the vaccine hesitancy in health workforce in Indonesia, because this is a very pertinent issue. I've seen it in UK. I was recently in the Middle East as well. That the different governments have very different policies. How the government is enforcing it in Indonesia, and how in your own setting, what is the uptake for the vaccine in healthcare workforce, and is there any hesitancy? If there is, how you guys are tackling it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It also came as a surprise to us that there are also hesitancy among the healthcare workers, even among medical doctors, even among our own colleagues. So that was a big surprise to us as well. We don't have the numbers, unfortunately, in terms of how many % of the medical doctors, for example, are hesitant to get vaccinated. And but what we do is more or less similar in terms of looking into what are the reasons that they're hesitant about, because different people are hesitant about different issues. For example, some of them are because of religious reason, even though they're medical doctors, but they have religious belief. So then you have to work it out through that, through the religious channel. So it's not so much from the medical profession, but more from the religious authorities who would be able to deal with that. So we try to identify what are the main issues behind their hesitancy. That's as far as we tried. And of course, if it's a matter of, for example, doubts of evidence and so forth, then we go to that avenue as well. Then we try to have discussions with them in terms of the state of the evidence and so forth. But on top of that, what is happening now, even though they don't actually say it's 100% mandatory, it's becoming a requirement in many settings. So it's making it very difficult if you're not getting vaccinated to be able to actually work or go anywhere, because now they ask for the vaccination status. Just now there was a circular from the government that all civil servants, before they go into the offices, they have to be screened for vaccination status. That means if you're not getting vaccinated, you're not getting into the offices back. So even though it's not mandatory, it's getting harder and harder for people to be able to go back to normalcy if you don't have a vaccination. So that I think that's one way the government tries to do that. We do it as well in our campus. So that's a requirement for our campus. Any lecturers who wants to teach face-to-face, they have to have a fully vaccination status. So even though we also cannot force them to get vaccinated, but we can put it as a requirement. I mean, if you want to work face-to-face with the student and medical students, you want to go back to the classroom, you have to be fully vaccinated. That's how we did it. Okay.
Okay, that's good. I think Dr. Kizito had a follow-up question on toxicity. Can you finish that so as we can receive some status from different areas? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a big concern, particularly as regards these boosters, and they are coming in such a short span. Ordinarily, most vaccines may be annually, like the influenzas and so on, but I'm aware and friends and colleagues in Israel, for example, who are even considering the fourth dose. So I've used a terminology there where you might reach a point where like the body has some antigenic overload or toxicity, for lack of another way of putting it. So this is something that is coming up. Is there something that we can already anticipate and come up with some kind of guideline to say, I mean, you can't keep on that trajectory of booster. You might end up every other time you have a booster and so on. So it's just an open question for discussion. Maybe you have some experience or some viewpoints and so on. Your thoughts on the same. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So as I mentioned, we don't have much evidence yet in terms of these boosters. That's what we're collecting at the moment. That's what we're helping with the monitoring to see the protections, the duration, what are the issues around that. So that's something which is still ongoing, and we don't have any enough robust evidence to actually to conclude anything at this point. The only booster we have at the moment is for the healthcare workers. That's basically because of the surge and because so many of our colleagues were falling ill or even passed away. So that, and also because their vaccination was much earlier. So the healthcare workers were vaccinated around January, February, like me, and the surge was around June and July. So the thinking was perhaps at that time, the protection has already waned out. So that's why we give them a booster for the healthcare worker during the June and July surge, not based on so much of the evidence because we don't have so much evidence until now, but it's more of the concern, the urgency, because a lot of colleagues were getting ill. So we thought that it was wise to at least to protect them, give them a third booster. But we are building the ship as it sails. So we are also still collecting the evidence to be able to give any conclusion. But at the moment, we don't have any robust conclusion to draw on in terms of recommending whether it's third, fourth booster, and so on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Yodi. I'm sure more questions will come up as we are doing our discussion at the end of the presentation. But for now, I think we would want various members of our advisory committee members to do a status presentation, just a little, and they tell us exactly how their countries are doing. I think we'll start with Uganda, and we get Professor from Makerere to tell us exactly how they are doing their vaccination. As we come back to Kenya, maybe Professor Machari will have something to tell us. So can we hear from Makerere, Prof? Yeah, I'm requesting Damari to really tell us about the status in Uganda.
With vaccination of health workers. We started off with vaccination of health workers, which is now almost over 50%. And this includes the clinical students who are also invited to be vaccinated. So whoever is not vaccinated in this group, it is optional, because it's still optional, but we continue to educate everyone to come and take on the available vaccines. And we are mainly using AstraZeneca, which was the first one that we got in, although we have hopes of getting additional vaccines in the next 1 month or two to cover everybody. So the next group that was vaccinated are the people above 50 years old and those with comorbidities. So these are continue to come in to take on the available vaccines. I think the most recent group that has started vaccination are the teachers of universities and tertiary institutions, as well as high schools. And this is in preparation for the opening of the schools. Yeah, but certainly we don't have enough vaccines in country to go around, and we are continuing to, the country is continuing to solicit for more vaccines from the different countries to be able to have a critical mass of people vaccinated before the lockdowns are opened up. So currently, the primary schools are still closed, even secondary schools are still closed, and most are doing online school. Yeah, so we think that as more people get vaccines, a little bit of opening of these institutions will be phased out, will be in a phased manner. Thank you. I submit, Chair.
Thank you very much, Damari. I think there is an issue which has arisen from there, is that people thought that they would have enough vaccines by now. They don't have. I would want to ask Dr. Yodi whether they had been promised vaccines and which never turned up, or is it only here in Africa where we are experiencing where that we thought that vaccine would be with us by now and we don't have it?
Yeah, I think that's an issue everywhere in low and middle income countries. We don't have enough vaccines also, to cover 70% of our population at the moment. And it comes in batches, and sometimes they don't come as promised, as you mentioned as well. So sometimes they come late, and that also become an issue because many of these vaccine you have to give from a dual dose. Yeah. So sometimes we have for the first dose, and then for the second dose, it's not yet secure. So that becomes something that's a bit worrying. So that's also still an issue here. So here, for example, now we stop in our campus the vaccination for the first dose, because we want to make sure that people are also getting their second dose. So we want to make sure that the people get the second dose covered, and then after that we will begin with the first dose again because of that issue in terms of the vaccine availability, and that it's also very difficult to actually secure it for the whole target as we would like to.
Thank you. So that is nearly a universal experience in the developing countries. So we want to hear from Professor Macharia what is their experience in Aga Khan and generally in the country.
Thank you, Harold. I'll make some few remarks, and then I also note Professor Tuoli has joined us, my dean here at the Medical College at Aga Khan. And Lubano might also maybe afterwards also want to chip in something. So mine is, briefly is that, at the moment we have had in the country, we've had about 250,000 positive cases of COVID with about 5,000 deaths. And that the vaccines, the main vaccine which is being administered, which has been administered in the country, is the AstraZeneca one through the COVAX program. We had a few doses that came in through a private sector, caused a little bit of a political upheaval of Sputnik, and that was stopped. But those who had received the first dose had provisions for the booster to be done, but further use of that vaccine was stopped. Then more recently, we've had some doses of Pfizer vaccine coming, most of these through donations, about 800,000 doses. We also recently had some about a similar amount, about 880,000 doses from Moderna, about 200,000 doses from Sinovac, and about 142,000 doses from Janssen very recently. And most of these are coming in as donations. As you can see, we are actually receiving these vaccines in a very small amounts. And we are really a long way into getting what we actually require as a country. I'm impressed with Indonesia, having a coverage of about 40%, as I said earlier on. And our coverage at the moment, I think, is about 2% at the best, about that 2.5%. The country has had about 3.4 million vaccinated. The first dose has been given to about 2.5 million. Of the Kenyan population is about 50 million. The second dose has been given to about 865,000. So we have indeed a long way to go. We are sharing the challenges of conspiracy theories and hesitancy, making some people who are eligible, even when the administration was allowed was rolled out stepwise, just like what you already said. And we are at the moment at a stage where, all those ones who are above, I believe, 15 years or 18 years, Professor Tuoli can clarify that later on, or my other colleagues, is now open for them to actually get the vaccines. That is all I want to say about at the national level. Within the other institution level, I think we've done it pretty well. We here at Aga Khan University, we have two types of staff, categories of staff: the permanent staff and the outsourced staff from other companies who come and render services within the university. For the permanent staff, the first dose has been administered to about 96.5% of the staff, which is pretty good. The ones who are missing out are for various reasons, maybe because some are on leave. Somebody talks about things like pregnancy, which has made some, have some hesitation as to whether to have the vaccine or not, but a small percentage. The second dose, because of based on the timing of the first dose and the required interval before the second dose, has been administered to about 85.6% of the permanent staff in the hospital. So we expect the others all are going to catch up with the second dose that had the first dose. For the outsourced staff to the hospital, about 97.6% have received the first dose, and about 94.8% have received the second dose. We've also been on a continuous basis collecting data on vaccines among other COVID-related data, and we have also recently introduced a requirement or request to have the vaccination status indicated in admission medical records, so that then we can also be able to tap on on continuous basis for our analysis. I think I will pause there and invite maybe Lukoy, if you want to add something at this stage, and then other colleagues.
Thank you, William. I think you have captured the situation as it is. Just to add that at Aga Khan University Hospital, we do have Moderna vaccine for those coming in for their first dose. And we also receive the AstraZeneca for those who require the second dose and anybody who missed out on the second dose. So that is going on. The government says about 3.2% of the adult population is now fully vaccinated. And for all practical purposes, any adult, anybody over 18 can go to a vaccination center and get vaccinated. There are areas where people administering the vaccine have been turning away. We have reports of pregnant women being turned away, but the official government position is that pregnant women should also be vaccinated. And it's the same position with the Kenyan Obstetric and Gynecological Society, as well as international organization that they are affiliated to. And yes, we are collecting data on vaccination status of all the patients we are admitting. And just like in other places, most of the patients with COVID-19 admitted since March, when we started the vaccination program, most of those in critical care and so on are people who haven't been vaccinated for one reason or another. And recently we had a surge among pregnant women that caused a bit of concern and caused people to start asking them to get vaccinated as well. So I think that's all I'll say for now. Unless there are questions, then we can address them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Atwoli. That's great. We are getting the status report for the two countries represented, and I'm sure Dr. Urbano has got something he can tell us. KEMRI has been in the forefront of handling this pandemic, so I would want to hear the status from their angle, what they are doing and how vaccination is affecting the type of work they're doing.
Well, yeah, thank you very much. First, just a slight diversion a little bit. I just realized that Dr. Yodi and myself have met before, and actually in 2005 in
it's a
Cambodia.
small world.
We are chatting on the sides, and I'm saying, oh my God, that he looks so familiar. And his wife was my classmate at the Institute of Tropical Medicine in Belgium. That's why I took off my mask.
Yes. So thank you, AAHCI, for bringing us together after 15 years.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you so much. Well, now, as regards KEMRI on our part, we are participating in a clinical trial for AstraZeneca vaccine that we have already finished registration, and we have been administering. So far, we are almost reaching the tail end of this, and we do not have any side effects so far, and the reception has been very good. That is one as regards the vaccination. The other is that we are part of the national system in terms of the advisories for policy briefs, particularly on sequencing for variants. I know it is something that is going to come up, but in this country, we have the capacity, and we have been able to sequence all the variants all the way, and the predominant variant now is Delta. And this is something that we think might also be influencing the response to the vaccinations. and we don't know how far we can go in terms of running after the mutations and so on. So that's something interesting that we as KEMRI are looking at. Another third component that KEMRI we are involved in is what I mentioned earlier, is that we are thinking long term as well in terms of building local capacity in terms of infrastructure for research capabilities to develop local vaccine, first starting with the fill and finish, and then to be able to receive or exchange technology so that we can also be able to prepare and manufacture vaccines. But this has also taken an interesting angle because as we move out of the low middle income country, we might not be able to be receiving vaccines for the other kind of diseases. So this has also a collateral benefit that we might be able to build capacity to develop the other traditional vaccines for childhood diseases and so on. So that's what I would say for now. I would also want to add just additionally, and maybe we didn't mention here, beyond the vaccines, there are also lots of other clinical trials and research proposals for other molecules, including traditional natural-based type of promising herbal kind of products that are likely to play a part in mitigating the impact of this. So maybe it is something worth also mentioning here. Beyond the vaccines, there are also other clinical trials on other type of local herbal products. I'll post there, submit, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Kizito. We can see it is a small world. You already know each other with our guest speaker, which is very good. So we can now go to discussions, because discussion, what we aim to do is try to see what are the things that are in common and what are the issues that we need to think very much deeply about, because I can start off and ask our guest speaker about the use of oxygen, how the use of oxygen has changed with vaccination, and what it is that they are hypothesizing that oxygen has been a very major drug. All of a sudden, something which is found naturally in air, and when it is now on a higher concentration, it has become a very important drug. And we want to hear what is the experience in Indonesia as we are discussing other things to do with vaccination. Thank you.
Okay, I was actually about to leave, but I'll just say a few because it's getting late. But thank you for the question. So indeed, oxygen was a really big issue here during the surge in June and July. And it also relates to how they use oxygen in an intensive care unit. So there are certain procedures which requires much more oxygen than usual. So what our lessons from there is that we are also not very resilient in terms of the oxygen supply. So for example, now we are developing technologies to be able so that some hospital can actually produce their own oxygen to a certain level, and it used to be something that the hospital avoid because it's something which seems to be costly, but apparently it's something which is important, necessary during a surge or during a pandemic like this. So that's in one hand. On the other hand, we are now looking into how are we using the oxygens, like what you just mentioned, whether there needs to be some changes in terms of the guidelines in terms of using the oxygens, because it seems like that was one of the issues as well in terms of how we use the oxygens, and so it doesn't match between the supply and demand. So we're working both on the supply side, on the demand side. So that's all I can say in brief, Dr. Kimani. I'm sorry I cannot share more details because I'm not so much into that particular subject, but that's what we have in terms of the lessons. And I have to apologize. I have to leave now because it's getting really late, but it's really a pleasure to be able to join this forum. So thank you very much, and all the best for the remaining of the discussion.
Thank you very much. I think now Professor Macharia can take over.
Hello. Yeah, I think it's just a discussion on the presentations which have been made. we open the session for any other communication. Thank you so much, Harun. I think the session has gone on very well. So anybody now with any communications related to the vaccines, and even beyond that, with a few minutes which are left, is okay to do that.
Yeah, I think I can just put one point across that I think the way we have heard from Indonesia, the way we have heard from also Camry, one is that our reliance on foreign countries for vaccine has really shown us that we need to invest more in our health sector. And we should also, even when we are promised, probably we should think about ordering our own doses, because I am obviously, Damari has told us that Uganda, they are still in lockdown. Obviously, ours, we have opened the lockdown, but there has been a surge. So I think it is the earlier time that people should learn how to invest in their health in our developing countries, so as in future we can have, when the technologies are available, we should order using maybe our own money. I don't know whether that thought is good, or what do you think, Prof. Macharia?
I think you're asking an open question because I think anybody can actually respond to that. I think is your view, which is which you are sharing, and wondering what the others think about it. Lokoya, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think that's an important point. But I think the problem with this COVID-19 vaccination has gone a little further than our government's ability to purchase the vaccine. I do know that the Kenya government actually ordered certain vaccines that were to be bought using funds availed from the Ministry of Health budget and from the government budget. But at some point, when India stopped exporting the vaccine because of the crisis within the country, then we couldn't actually get vaccines to buy. And subsequently, other manufacturers allowed the wealthier countries to hoard these vaccines. Some countries buying 5 times the vaccines that they need of different types and stockpiling, and therefore preventing lower middle income countries from accessing them, even if they had money to buy. So I think this has exposed a totally different version of what we might argue as a global health paradigm, where when push comes to shove, the wealthier countries are willing to let the low middle income countries suffer, while they take some patently irrational decisions like stockpiling 5-6 times what you need, while other countries do not have access even if they want to buy. So that has been a concern that I have noted in how we are doing things globally, and perhaps it will become a point of discussion in future. And the other thing that goes to reinforce these attitudes out there is, for instance, when now we have started vaccinating with exactly the same vaccines that are being used, say, in the UK, AstraZeneca, then the UK says now when it comes to recognizing who has been vaccinated for purposes of travel, then it takes a little longer for the vaccination in a low middle income country to be recognized in the UK, even though it is probably, some of them came as donations from the UK. So these are raising questions that will impact hesitancy in the general population. Because then people are saying, you told us these vaccines are universal, they are safe, everybody's using them. How come in the UK, even though the vaccine is nominally the same, they're saying that they don't recognize it? So we have to start thinking about the impact of the public health decisions that are made in one place, how they affect other places. Much the same way we thought about COVID-19 and the discussions we were having this time last year on COVID-19 and the impact they had in other places where the pandemic arrived a little later. It's a chain, and as we said, we can't be isolated and think that we are safe. Even innocuous decisions that we make with regards to our own population, the impact is far-reaching and can affect lives of people far away from where we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Lukoe. Anybody else with some comments?
Yeah, maybe just a general comment, and I agree with the previous speakers. I think quickly and in a very subtle way, the question of COVID and vaccination status is clearly becoming a variable in terms of access to services or to travel and so on. And it's something that we perhaps need to have some form of very deliberate, proactive approach. Otherwise, then, as a continent now with less than 5% vaccination, we clearly are going to be left behind to be the one again to bear the burden not of the pandemic itself in the direct way, but indirectly as people who cannot move freely or who may not access services, including in our own country or place, because of the vaccination status. So it moves away from the pandemic, it comes to the vaccination status. So we need to really think hard and long term to see how we can, we as the academia or as the elites, to see how we can put in place mechanisms that would anticipate and mitigate even for the next pandemic. The second thing also is that within the country also, that it's quite heterogeneous and mixed. And I know it's a sensitive thing that within our country, there are some regions where vaccines were, of course, sent there, but the consumption was so low, utilization or uptake was so low that they had to be recalled nearly almost 80 or 90%. So that is also problematic. And these are the usual counties that also have the quote, dysfunctional health systems there somewhere and so on. So I think those are some of the operational issues that quickly, as also we receive the circulars from the public service that may in a way suggest that vaccination is a requirement for you to be at a workplace, then it becomes an issue, and I think it might also be impacting on the mental health status of people, and I'm glad Prof. Lukoye is at the forefront of anticipating some of these things. So I think those are some of the things that I thought maybe they don't have a clear-cut answer, but they are emerging as the pandemic also takes into a different phase and so on. And the impact of the economic and social status, I think, cannot be gainsaid. It's very obvious. And right now in Mombasa, we are in the MTEF. We are finalizing tomorrow. And we can see that the resources are very, very limited in terms of our ability even to deal with the other usual issues. So I guess we need a bit more. One last thing I keep forgetting, I thought I should mention is that we need perhaps to figure out a way in which we can work a bit more closely in the proverbial triple helix, the academia, the research industry, and the research institutions, and the industries, as well as maybe the marketing industry, so that we try to accrue the whole value chain from discovery to development and deployment of whatever solutions that may be there. I submit, Chair.
Thank you, Lubano. You have indeed depicted the very complex issue that it is. That on one hand, we are talking about hesitancy. On the other side, we are talking about unavailability of these vaccines. And when the vaccines are available, then you wonder where the boundary is between an individual's rights and the rights of the general public that you potentially would put at risk if you are not vaccinated. And hence the different approaches which have been used of using like some kind of soft, some kind of firm persuasion, for people to access the vaccines when they are available. Well, that aside, the other issue which I'd like sample maybe to highlight on also is about the rising seroprevalence. Because even without the vaccines, the kind of prevalences that we saw sometime earlier in the year, it appears to have dramatically risen over time. Kizito, you can maybe make a comment on that. And we also hear from Uganda what's happening on the seroprevalence, both for health workers and the general public. Kizito, you want to make a comment?
Yes. I do not have the latest data, but the last time I checked one of the surveys that was done was quite revealing that upwards of about 67 to 70%. There's already exposure and people have antibodies, and maybe it might be more, though it was in some select places, but I have no doubt that is reflective of what we have within our community. Now, the biggest question that we are trying to answer now is that across the last 18 months, yes, we know not all the mortalities have been reported, but still they aren't that dramatic. And the big question we're asking is that, what is it? Were the Africans or Kenyans previously exposed to this similar, because coronaviruses have been there for a long time, but this other novel one is a bit different in terms of just infectivity and so on, and it's shouting. But when you look at the raw numbers as reported, not to minimize the impact on socioeconomic, but raw numbers may be less than 5,000 or thereabouts in nearly a 2-year period. Yes, compared to other things, road traffic accidents and so on. That the big question should be, what is it? Do we have something already in our system that might be at play and so on? But a straight answer to the seroprevalence is very high, upwards of 70-75% from the last time I looked at the data, but I know other surveys are going on now. I submit, Chair.
Thank you. I note like we really don't have, like Tamale is not here. I think she has dropped off, so we can't get the view from Uganda. And I note that we only have a few more minutes, so if we have some final comments anybody would like to make before I hand it over back to Habiba.
Yes, Prof. Macharia, I've got just a comment along that line of self-prevalence. I guess that I could say it is a good thing because obviously we know about what we call the herd immunity. This one, the herd of cattle. Now, if people have got more of this immunity, then the more people in the population will be obviously safeguarded, or they'll be now immune from getting the disease. And I think maybe sooner or later it may be what are vaccinated or others who the vaccination may not have taken. So I think that's prevalence would be a good thing. The area, the whole population gets are able to be immune against the coronavirus. I think the better for all of us, so as we can go back to our normal lives. I hope it will not take too long. Already, it has affected mental health of people. It has affected their businesses and their livelihoods. So I think the area we try to go back to normal with that higher self-prevalence, the better.
Lukoye sounds not too optimistic. So maybe a comment, Lukoye.
I wanted just to point out that, and this is a challenge to our research institutions and to ourselves, that the seroprevalence from natural infection has also been shown to go down. So the expression of antibodies also wanes over time. And therefore, if you repeated a seroprevalence survey 1 year from now, you might get figures that are different if people haven't been re-exposed to the virus. And so this still raises the concerns about vaccination, the need for vaccination as an augmentation strategy, even if people have been exposed, because it seems there are slightly differing kinds of immunity that are conferred from the infection vis-a-vis from the vaccination, which targets specific areas of the virus only. So I think researchers need to start thinking about how long can they tell people that after you've been infected, whether there's protection or not, you still have some antibodies, but for how long before they start waning? And they start designing interventions around that, waxing and waning of antibody levels. Thank you very much.
Thank you, especially the many new variants that keep on coming. Zito, you are already wondering for how long we will continue chasing the variants. That you don't know after, even after you've had these antibodies, how long will you last or how many times you get reinfected. Do you see any people who have actually been vaccinated or who've had the actual disease before getting a secondary episode? So I think a lot of unclear things. But in interest of time, I think I'll hand over to Habiba now for your final word. Thanks a lot to everyone for a very rich discussion.
Thank you, Professor Macharia. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. We have the annual meeting next week, so a reminder to register for that as well and join those sessions. The link is in the chat, and we have recorded this session, so we'll share it with our members in the region who are not able to join us today. And in case there are any additional questions for Dr. Yodi, I know that he's more than happy to be contacted by email. So I hope everyone found this beneficial, and thank you, Professor Macharia, for your leadership in the region, and Dr. Kimani for facilitating. And we hope to see you all online next week.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the support of your office.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Yes, from this end.
Thank you and bye.
Bye-bye.